Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Waste will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, show that ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee in today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, show that ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document in the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement for 5 minutes. Most of us are familiar with unfortunate and unnecessary reputation of our country for building and repairing infrastructure. It takes too long, costs too much. Many of what we would today call mega projects, like the original Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge and the Triborough Bridge in New York, took just a few years to build. Hoover Dam was completed in just 5 years. While delays to large projects garner all of the media attention, many of the same laws, processes, and red tape that they added years to project completion and time and cost also plague smaller projects initiated by both freight and passenger services centers, carriers. Recognizing the importance of a safe, efficient, and reliable freight and passenger rail transportation system, Congress has authorized several programs to assist those carriers who, owing to their own size and market segments, lack the resources of larger operators to invest substantial funds in their infrastructure needs. These include programs like CRISI, which serves as a vital source of funding to assist short-line railroads to rehabilitate and expand infrastructure necessary for the mission to provide first and last mile freight service. Improving the efficiency and effectiveness of these programs is the purpose of today's hearing and a goal of the committee's work to reauthorize Department of Transportation surface transportation programs. Additionally, federal infrastructure funding should support core programs and construction of infrastructure. The Trump administration has inherited a backlog of more than 3,000 unobligated DOT grants. Responsibility of the administration took the time to review these grants to ensure that the best use of taxpayer dollars. Today, the department announced it approved more than 1,800 grants totaling $3 billion. I look forward to working with the administration to reduce the Biden backlog in a timely manner and ensure that federal grants are focused on improving critical infrastructure. Again, I look forward to learning the views of today's witnesses. I now recognize Ranking Member Titus for 5 minutes for an opening remark. You're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. You know, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, this committee made some historic investments in passenger rail, and we're seeing the impact of that all across the country. Certainly, we're seeing it in Las Vegas, thanks to a $3 billion grant from the Federal State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail. Brightline West has broken ground on a new high-speed train between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. I've been working to bring high-speed rail to the Southwest for many years, and I'm excited, excuse me, that it's becoming a reality. I'm also proud that this project is creating good-paying union jobs. Rail union workers are building Brightline West, and they're going to play a role in operating and maintaining it once it's in service. In fact, it's been estimated that the project will create 35,000 construction jobs and 1,000 permanent jobs, and that's nothing to sneeze at. While Brightline West is a success story, I know it's not the only model we need to support we need to support as we work to improve intercity passenger rail. We've got to remember that there's not a passenger rail system in the world, in the whole world, that operates without some government investment in capital projects. I believe we need to provide robust funding for Amtrak and competitive grants in the next transportation authorization bill. We don't want to lose all the progress that we've made over the past 5 years, and that's what will happen if we don't invest. Amtrak services are found in red and blue districts, and I'm glad to see that some of my Republican colleagues voted in favor of amendments to protect Amtrak funding for the Northeast Corridor and for the North Carolina rail system during last week's markup of this committee. There are many communities across the U.S. that will benefit from sustained federal rail investments. The Federal Rail Administration has identified 69 corridors in 44 states as ready for additional investment. These are in many of our districts with proposed lines, extensions to existing routes, or improvements to the rail service in 49 districts on this committee alone, 49 in this committee alone. Now, in addition to helping expand passenger rail service, federal rail grants also make our rail network safer. For example, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program helps address safety concerns at grade crossings. There are over 2,000 incidences and 200 fatalities at these dangerous intersections every year. We can and must do better. The $3 billion Congress allocated to this program is helping eliminate these problems, or at least make them safer across the country. I'd like to use our time today to hear from our witnesses about how investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law are improving rail services in your communities or with your systems. And I also welcome suggestions for how we can work together to speed up the grant implementation process, whether through improving the obligation process or ensuring that FRA has sufficient staff to execute these grants. I believe that targeted change could help speed up that grant implementation and help move the systems forward. So I look forward to working with you, Mr. Webster, Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Larson, on these issues as the surface transportation reauthorization process moves forward. So thank you, and I yield back.
I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee. Mr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Webster and Ranking Member Titus, for holding today's hearing. Today's hearing is about efficiency and effectiveness in delivering rail improvements. I support these goals, and yet I am concerned this administration is more worried about the rhetoric than rolling up its sleeves to get there. In this first 100 days, the President has driven up costs and cut critical services. We've seen chaos and confusion in the constant freezing and unfreezing of transportation grants, attacks on the workforce that deliver these transportation investments, and conditions placed on grants that have nothing to do with transportation. The bipartisan infrastructure law was a transformational investment in many things, including passenger rail. After 50 years of underinvestment, Amtrak and the recipients of rail competitive grants can plan and succeed thanks to 5 years of guaranteed funding for capital projects. This funding has allowed Amtrak to address decades of deferred maintenance and begin construction on long-delayed capital projects. This investment has allowed Brightline West to begin construction, as Ranking Member Titus has highlighted. Funding has been announced to support safety improvements all over the country, including my district. In early 2025, the City of Everett was awarded $18 million to eliminate 2 existing crossings with Burlington Northern Santa Fe through the construction of an overpass and roundabout near the Smith Island Terminal. And in 23, the City of Burlington was awarded $2 million in a planning grant to identify which of the city's 16 at-grade crossings is most suitable for grade separation. Nationally, these investments help create 1.7 million construction and manufacturing jobs across the country. And these are jobs with good wages and benefits. That's why it's hard to understand why the administration has, over the past 100 days, halted progress and put millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of jobs, and thousands of projects at risk. Secretary Duffy testified last month before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee that roughly 3,200 previously awarded projects were on hold. The BIL invested more than $48 billion in 445 projects to improve rail safety and expand passenger rail travel nationwide, and still the administration has refused to tell us which of these projects are on hold. In the Pacific Northwest, Washington State and Oregon are committed to advancing the Cascadia High-Speed Rail Project. This project will connect people and communities, increase our regional economic competitiveness, and improve the quality of life across the region with high-speed rail between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, and Portland. It will connect workers to good jobs, it will increase access to affordable housing, and offer greater mobility for almost 10 million people. And similarly, the federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail is matching billions of dollars in state and private investment in passenger rail improvements, including bridges and tunnels on the Northeast Corridor. The BIL is improving transportation in every state and every congressional district, which is why it's concerning the administration is trying to undermine that progress. Just last month, Secretary Duffy reduced previously awarded grants for rail infrastructure in New York, Newark, Dallas, and Houston. It also sent a letter to put all federal grant recipients on notice that previously awarded grants will be reviewed and possibly paused to ensure they align with this administration's priorities. If jobs and investments aren't the administration priorities, what are? Halting the flow of benefits from appropriations already approved by Congress is a strange way to launch the golden age of infrastructure. It is not efficient, it is not effective. Instead, we should be working on a bipartisan basis to keep it going. Meanwhile, the department continues to signal that mass layoffs are coming even though US DOT staff who administer grants are there to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse of the money Congress allocates. The FRA is a grant-making agency. Approximately 2.2% of its budget is for salaries and benefits. Federal workforce cuts provide minimal cost reductions and will make the department less efficient. Moving forward, public investment is vital to building a truly national intercity passenger rail system. Every passenger rail system in the world developed with some form of public investment. Highways, transit, airports, and harbor maintenance projects have access to dedicated revenue, and it's time that we provide long-term funding certainty for intercity passenger rail. I'm committed to building on the successes of the investments in the BIL and ensuring that this committee can say that America builds rail at hearings for many years to come. I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and I look forward to the discussion. With that, I yield back.
I too would like to welcome the witnesses for coming. Thank you for spending your time to come and share with us your insights, and look forward to hearing what you have to say. Briefly, I'd like to explain our lighting system. There's 3 lights. Green is go, yellow is slow down, it's time to end, and red means stop. Pretty simple. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record without objection. Show that ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as the witnesses have provided answers to any questions that might be submitted in writing. Without objection, show that ordered. Ask also unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, show that ordered. As your written testimony has been made a part of the record, subcommittee asks you to limit your remarks to 5 minutes. We'll start with Mr. Dietrich. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Matthew Dietrich, and I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Rail Development Commission. We are part of the Ohio Department of Transportation, and we work on projects involving rail infrastructure, including short line grants, rail coordination for highway projects, and grade crossing safety. We use state, private, and federal funding, including FHWA formula funding and FRA discretionary grants for our work. We have used both the RCE and CRISI grant programs to supplement and leverage our state programs, a short line program and a grade crossing safety program started by Governor Mike DeWine. We use the governor's safety funds to match RCE funding specifically for grade separations, and we use our FHWA Section 130 funds for at-grade crossings that cannot be separated. First, you have my written remarks, so I would like to summarize, but I hope to leave you with 2 takeaways. The RCE and CRISI grant programs are critical to the improvement of the freight rail infrastructure and safety. I can say without these programs, many of the 24 projects that we have received funding for just simply would not have happened without the federal programs. Second, the more we can use standard project delivery processes that state DOTs around the country use to deliver other projects, the faster we will be able to complete them. With that, I've offered the following suggestions to streamline the project delivery. As you all know, grade separations are large projects that take a long time. Therefore, the applicants use the funding they have available, which is often state or FHWA formula funds. Because modal agencies' project development processes differ slightly, there's a great deal of time spent retrofitting these applications and creating barriers to development. This work could be avoided if the FRA would accept other modal agencies' standards and processes, especially when it comes to NEPA. The FRA could also provide pre-award authority letters with the notification of award to grantees. There's a natural lag time with these federal grants, from NOFO to submission to notification to the kickoff meeting. My organization has taken advantage of pre-award authority letters, but even those pre-award authority letters require additional paperwork after the kickoff meeting. If the FRA could provide pre-award authority letters immediately with the notification of award, grant recipients could continue to develop these projects concurrently with the administrative processes. The documentation for a project awarded to my organization is the same required for an organization that has never received any federal funding. If the FRA developed a tiered grant process that could streamline grant administration for states, these projects could advance more quickly. For example, a great deal of the grant documentation isn't focused on the process, but on the governance and compliance. As a recipient of federal funds in the state DOT, my entire organization is structured for federal compliance. So, so having separate documents is not only redundant, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of legal review. Another thing is that FRA could pre-qualify states to administer grants by allowing us to take more responsibility of administration. And I look to the NEPA assignment as a possible blueprint. Many states, including Ohio, have NEPA assignment where we assume federal responsibilities. If a program like this could be expanded to cover the administration of discretionary grants, we could take some burden off of our federal colleagues while at the same time accelerating projects. It was mentioned about the obligation process. The obligation process right now for discretionary grants is the same for formula funds. Formula fund states have flexibility. Discretionary grant projects, you don't. That means that there's obligation. If you have construction, it's sitting out there possibly for years as you're going through the process. This creates a worst case scenario. So if FRA could revise its obligation process to more accurately represent the commitments of the agency, that would add certainty and eliminate the need to continually revise and renegotiate grant agreements as we move forward. Finally, consider allocating a portion of the program to states so we can develop the projects. Of the last award, 123 awards, only 33 received construction of funding. If we as states could have a small portion to develop projects, then we could not only develop more complete projects, but it would increase I think it would increase the number and quality of the application pool. And please accept these comments as constructive criticism. We want to work together with all of you, with our FRA colleagues, to make this program better and a success. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Mr. Yuccolito.
Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Titus, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Garrett Yuccolito, and I serve as the Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Transportation, and I'm currently the President of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, or AASHTO. Today, it's my honor to testify on behalf of AASHTO, which represents all state departments of transportation, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. I'm proud to bring perspective from across the country and share what we're experiencing in Connecticut. Transportation's more than pavement and steel. It's a force multiplier for nearly every aspect of our lives. It's how people get to work and school, how we visit family and friends for important milestones, and how goods move from factories to store shelves. Transportation is the quiet foundation that supports our economy, our communities, and our way of life. When our transportation system functions well, it's invisible, and when it doesn't, impacts are widespread. We need to view infrastructure as a national platform rather than a one-off project. Roads in Connecticut fuel supply chains in Georgia. Rail lines in the Northeast support commerce across the Midwest. Success isn't local, it's networked. And to keep that network strong, we need sustained strategic investment that reflects the scale and complexity of the system we're depending on. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided historic investment in our rail transportation system with $102 billion in federal rail funding from fiscal years 22 through 26. This infusion of investment has been critical to state DOT passenger and freight rail efforts. Years of deferred projects are now finally moving forward. Much of the railroad infrastructure in our country was built in the 1800s and has been neglected for generations. The Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail Grant Program has been instrumental in tackling many of these repair backlogs, boosting system performance, and fueling the modernization of our rail services, creating a faster, more connected transportation network. For example, in Connecticut, we're making progress replacing our aging, heavily used movable railroad bridges, including the 129-year-old Norwalk River Bridge known as the Walk Bridge. About a decade ago, the Walk Bridge sustained numerous catastrophic mechanical failures which crippled the entire Northeast corridor. Now, thanks to the federal funding, a replacement project is underway and will no longer have to fear the impacts to passenger and freight traffic because of another mechanical failure. Bold investments like these will transform passenger rail service, improve the reliability of freight rail, and ensure people and goods can travel safely and quickly throughout our country. None of this would be possible without dedicated, sustained federal support. We need reliable, predictable funding to plan decades' worth of capital improvements. Fits and starts of funding make it difficult to plan and implement any project. This wouldn't be acceptable on our highway side, and it shouldn't be acceptable on the railroad side. Without formula funding like highway and transit infrastructure, our railroad investments are dependent on discretionary grant programs. This makes us more attuned to opportunities to improve the grants application process and administrative procedures. Duplicative permitting requirements and convoluted regulatory environments can delay the delivery of much-needed rail projects, which ultimately drives up costs. While it's not unique to the railroad sector, due to the difficulties working in an active rail territory, the impact can be more pronounced. This inclusion of a dedicated rail title in the next Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill will be critical to maintaining the current momentum of state DOT passenger and freight rail efforts. But without administrative changes to improve the efficiency of our grant programs and legislative changes to eliminate costly, redundant regulatory hurdles, project sponsors will continue to encounter project delays, increased costs, and inefficiency. We do need a long-term reauthorization that extends current IIJA funding levels that keeps pace with inflation, all while giving state DOTs the ability to efficiently deliver projects that keep our communities safe and keeps our economy moving. AASHTO and its members are committed to implementing the IIJA and its historic investment in rail. With so much aging rail infrastructure, this is going to take a lot of time and effort, but we're on the way to building a future age of rail in America. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hicks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Titus, and members of this esteemed subcommittee. My name is Kevin Hicks, and I'm a Senior Vice President and Rail and Freight Market Sector Leader at Gannett Fleming Transsystems, or GFT. I currently serve on the Board of Directors of the National Railroad Construction and Maintenance Association, the NRC, and as the Chairman of the NRC's Policy and Legislative Committee. In my role at GFT, I work on business development and project delivery nationally for clients in the railroad industry. Since 2010, GFT has been helping the federal government to deliver railroad infrastructure projects, both through our design services for railroad owners, through public agency projects building railroad infrastructure that expands freight and passenger rail capacity, and also by assisting the FRA in oversight of the successful delivery of projects that have some federal investment through an FRA grant. The firm has provided oversight for over 500 grants across the U.S. Prior to joining GFT, I spent the first 25 years of my career with the Union Pacific Railroad, serving in many engineering positions and ultimately working my way up to AVP and Chief Engineer of Design. Though I now currently reside in Omaha, Nebraska, I grew up in Congressman Burleson's district in the town of Ash Grove, Missouri. I'm honored to join this distinguished panel today and to provide a perspective on this important topic. As I mentioned in my opening, I serve on the Board of Directors of the NRC. While GFT is just one member company within the NRC, our member companies generate more than 100,000 jobs nationwide, supplying, building, and maintaining freight, passenger, and industrial rail networks. The NRC supports the continued funding of the FRA grant programs at existing or increased funding levels. We appreciate the committee focusing its attention on the issue of improving the efficiency and effectiveness of federal rail assistance. Let me preface my comments by saying that I think the staff of the FRA is full of hardworking and talented individuals, and my comments are not an indictment on them. Let me first describe at a high level a few of the issues from our perspective. More detailed information is included in my written testimony. First, the selection process is slow. The grant award selection can take about around 6 months after the application is submitted. With the influx of funding from the IIJA, the size and complexity of the NOFOs has increased, which has impacted the speed of selecting projects. Second, the grant takes too long to obligate. It takes 6 to 18 months on average to obligate a grant after selection. It takes too long to deliver projects, and the waste due to delays in the forms of administrative and planning costs, inflation, and lost opportunities for alternative use of capital hinder us from achieving our capacity expansion goals. Regarding NEPA, it takes a very long time to obtain environmental clearances. The project sponsor is not able to engage with FRA or USDOT on the NEPA process until the grant's awarded. Third, delays to project implementation. Numerous factors impact project readiness, and most of these factors are outside of the FRA's control. But the FRA could do more to avoid future delays by having project sponsors better define the status of these factors in advance of obligation. Now I'll turn to some ideas to help enhance the process. Our recommendations for reforms focus around 3 key themes: creating project pipelines, sufficient and consistent staffing, and stakeholder agreements. Congress should consider directing FRA to identify a pre-approved, or at least a prior vetted pipeline of projects. FRA should consider further standardization of the grant applications, thereby reducing the effort required both in preparation and in review. In addition, the agreements and scopes of work should be more formulaic and template-based. FRA could also consider existing grant programs and having FRA could also consider consolidating existing grant programs and having separate programs for preliminary engineering, or PE, and NEPA versus final design and construction grants. For final design and construction grants, FRA should require PE and NEPA to be completed in order to be eligible for funding. This would help to ensure that the projects selected for final design and construction are truly ready to be delivered in an acceptable time frame. FRA should also commit to an expedited NEPA process timeline and eliminate NEPA requirements where states have existing or duplicative requirements. To help make the grant agreement processing time more efficient, there needs to be sufficient and consistent FRA staffing with experience, capacity, and the ability to make decisions. Empowering FRA project managers to be decision makers would help address the problem. And regarding stakeholder agreements, the FRA should require PE, cost estimates, and stakeholder concurrence within grant applications. A sign-off form or letter template would make it easier for the FRA to collect and verify stakeholder concurrence. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective today. I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Now, is it Bevel? You're recognized.
Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee. My name is Kristen Bevel. I'm General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer at Pensley Railroad Company. I also serve as an elected Vice President on the board of the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. The Pensley Railroad Company owns 8 short line railroads across the country that offer freight services, transloading, railcar storage, and industrial development opportunities. At Pensley, we operate 850 miles as the first mile, last mile to our customers, connecting them to the national rail network. Most short lines began with the purchase of an unprofitable branch line from a much larger railroad. Those short lines didn't have a lot of money, weren't in great shape, and didn't have much traffic, often suffering from years of deferred maintenance. But the local entrepreneurs who took over these lines and to make a go of it, including the Pensley family, which is our company's namesake, were very successful. In fact, today, there are 600 short line railroads that manage a third of the freight rail network. Short lines operate in 49 states, support 478,000 jobs, and produce $56 billion in value added to the economy, and yet account for only 6% of the freight industry's total revenue. We are small businesses that are critical to the communities in this nation. For decades, this subcommittee has supported policies that have allowed short-line railroads to survive and even thrive. Almost all of you on this committee have a short-line railroad in your district, and Pinsley's Grenada Railroad operates in Congressman Cohen's district. This hearing today focuses on federal rail assistance and its efficiency and effectiveness. Let me assure you, federal dollars are critical to our efforts to grow as short lines. Although we invest up to a third of our own revenue in maintenance, the backlog of projects to upgrade rail and bridges to modern standards on short lines is $12 billion. That's a staggering number. Fortunately, this committee and Congress has provided several grant programs that have allowed short lines to grow our customer base, provide quality jobs, and drive the economy forward in rural and small-town America. As Congress looks to reauthorize the Surface Transportation Bill, our top priority is robust and advanced appropriated funding for the CRISI grant program. It's the only federal grant program that short lines are eligible to apply for directly, and it's been transformational. 240 CRISI grants have been awarded to short line railroads. Advanced appropriations allow for certainty and predictability and will ensure that more railroads will apply. My testimony provides examples of completed CRISI projects with specific benefits and statements of support. None of those would have been possible without the CRISI program. The Pinsley Railroad and our customers have benefited directly from CRISI grants. Our Florida Gulf and Atlantic Railroad, which spans the panhandle of Florida and provides critical transportation of aggregates that are used by the Florida Department of Transportation to build Florida's highways and roads. A CRISI grant enabled us to upgrade that line to a more efficient, reliable service all along that route, which helped our customer, Anderson Columbia, grow its aggregate business and ensured that the Florida DOT has the materials it needs to maintain Florida's highways. While short-line investment is the best bang for the buck to be had for the public dollar, the CRISI grant program does have some room for improvement. The time from award announcement to obligation and funding is simply too long. Delays can cause overruns and costs, and our customers miss opportunities when we have to wait and wait. Good options to speed up the process include batch processing of NEPA categorical exclusions, more aggressive use of pre-award authority, or setting deadlines for agency processing. This program can move faster with no real additional risk, and that would be good for getting America to build. The rail crossing elimination and Section 130 programs and the support of Operation Lifesaver are also very valuable to our industry as they address the risk of injuries at grade crossings. As you shape the nation's next surface transportation bill, we urge that these vital programs and policies be secured in legislative text, and that process improvements are considered to help maximize the value and impact of each dollar. Thank you for your longstanding support of our short line railroads, our customers, and the communities that we serve. I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you all for your testimony. Appreciate that, and we'll now turn to questions from the panel. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. This is a great deal of commonality among all the witnesses regarding the specific challenges you experience when applying the federal infrastructure funding. If you had to rank the top 3 challenges, what would they be? Specifically, where would NEPA fit in the ranking? Just start with Mr. Dietrich and go down the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the challenges with the discretionary grants, first and foremost, is the stop-start and the need to address that and use the downtime. You mentioned NEPA specifically, and that is definitely in number 1 or 2 in terms of advancing the projects. And it's not compliance with NEPA, it's the differences in the modal agencies, as I mentioned in my testimony. We, as Ohio, have actually taken the advantage of, we had NEPA assignment for FHWA funding. We just received NEPA assignment for FRA because we think that's important enough that, again, getting those into our standard processes allows us to meet all the federal requirements, but to do it internally and quicker without all the back and forth. So I think those are the two big issues. It's the stop and start nature of the discretionary grants, as well as trying to standardize NEPA. Thank you.
Mr. Yacolito?
I would definitely put NEPA as one of the top items under the umbrella of all the regulatory pieces that come along with it. Section 106, historic preservation, endangered species, NEPA. I think all of those fall under the umbrella of NEPA in my mind as something that needs to be addressed. That's usually from my state, it's the biggest hurdle. I think the second piece would be FRA has been given a Herculean task of standing up a massive program out of the blue with the new legislation, and they've been doing their best job. But that means there's a lot of opportunity to do it better and learn from the mistakes made by the other modal administrations.
Mr. Hicks?
I would say NEPA efficiency is in my top two, and it goes hand in hand with my number one, with the number one being perhaps a two-stage process or a pipeline. And the need for that is somewhat based on the NEPA timelines and the long timelines that it takes to get NEPA approved. I'd say that's where it falls with me is the need to change the process or reduce the amount of NEPA to condense the timelines to get projects actually out on the ground.
Ms. Bevel?
Yeah, I would just add for shoreline railroads, our projects, especially under the Chrissy Grant program, are often subject to a categorical exclusion from NEPA. And if there's a way to speed up that process, that would be very helpful in speeding up the projects overall.
So if NEPA process was streamlined, how would this reduce both the project cost and also the time of completion? I'll start with Mr. Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For example, and again, I'll go to NEPA assignment because I think that's where there's a lot of opportunities there. We're signing programmatic agreements right now with all the resource agencies so that, Army Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, things like that rail projects are now included in those programmatic agreements so they can process those just like, and again, I look at Garrett, we're working with these agencies all the time. And so the more we can put these into the pipelines, the better we can establish that. We're adapting our computer systems internally so that we can process these projects. Take the uniqueness out of the discretionary grants and just put them into the pipeline like every other project. That's where I think is where we can see, it's not the big reform stuff, but I think that's the opportunities in the nuts and bolts where we can really see this stuff progress quicker.
Mr. Yacolito?
And Mr. Chair, I can add a specific example in my state where we had to redo our, when we got FRA funding, after having FTA funding, FRA required to do a new finding of no significant interest impact, and that added 6 months onto the project before we could start construction, which drove up costs by about $90 million. And so that, is a huge impact to my state and all the taxpayers.
Well, my time is expiring, so Ms. Titus, you are recognized for your questions, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was proud to work with my colleagues to provide the $66 billion of supplemental advance appropriations over the 5 years for passenger rail that was in the bipartisan infrastructure law. As we begin work on the surface transportation authorization, as the ranking member of this committee, one of my priorities is to be sure that we do that guaranteed funding for rail programs again. I think I know the answer to this based on your all's testimony, but I'd like to just get a one-word answer to the question. Just go down the row. First off, have your industries or members benefited from the BIL's guaranteed funding for rail, Mr. Dietrich? Yes or no?
Yes.
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 Good. That's what I thought. Now, as a follow-up, should this committee include guaranteed funding for rail in the next surface transportation authorization? Mr. Dietrich?
Yeah, I apologize for my ignorance, but I don't necessarily understand what the difference is, a rail title or just rail funding?
Just real money. Guaranteed.
Yes.
Oh, well, how about a title?
I don't, like I said, I'm a little bit out of my element here, so,
Just give me the money, huh?
sorry.
Well, whatever you want to call it. Okay, that's a good answer.
Yes.
Yes, we support rail funding.
Yes, we would like to see advance appropriations for Chrissy program.
Great. Well, I agree with you, and I think that's what we should do. Another question, Mr. Eucalipto, I'll ask you. In your testimony, you asked Congress to reauthorize and fund the Corridor ID program. Now, I talked about the $3 billion grant for Brightline, but that doesn't happen overnight. You got to bring it together. You got to plan. Where is it going to go? What's the best use of the money? Help states reorganization, planning, regional groups. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you think this will help states and how this will be a good thing to consider into the new bill?
Yes, thank you for the question. The Corridor ID program, I think, is really beneficial because it allows us as states and applicants to make the case as to why we should be making this longer-term investment. It allows for future applications for capital funding to be more well-reasoned and well-justified, so we can make the best use of the taxpayer dollars we're being given. There's a lot of work that goes into trying to plan where we should be building future rail service, rail lines, or increasing capacity and improving existing rail lines. And that takes a lot of work. We need the partnership with the FRA to be able to do that work, to do the service development planning, to then come back to the FRA, to Congress to make the case why we should be continuing to make those investments. Without doing that pre-planning work ahead of time that Corridor ID allows, it's really not 100% baked applications for future funding.
Thank you. Some places we need improvement, some places we need expansion, and we need to identify those places and move forward on those projects, and this would help to do that.
Absolutely.
Mr. Dietrich, you mentioned about multimodal, multiple transportation projects, some of the logistical challenges. Could you talk a little bit about anything that the FRA could do with the Federal Highway Administration to bring that coordination that we need, or move it along faster, or do grants simultaneously? Elaborate on that.
Thank you for the question. That's one of my favorite discussions. I think that, again, if we could standardize some of these processes, literally, my staff has developed a cheat sheet between our project development process at the state DOT and FRA, and when we're talking to consultants, we have to tell them which one we're using. So the more we could standardize those processes, and for the modal agencies to accept those processes, and NEPA is just one of them. It goes above and beyond that. But the more those could be standardized at the US DOT, the easier it'll be. Garrett had mentioned about FTA funding. We had a project with a grade separation where from the time of the application to award, we were awarded FHWA formula funding from our state DOT, a substantial amount, $2 million, to progress the project work. Because we were able to progress that work, we thought everybody be very happy. When the award came along, we actually lost $70,000 of the award because we advanced planning without that pre-award authority letter. So those are the, there's language in the legislation, especially IIJA, that counted those expenses, especially for the RCE project since the award. So, it was the first time in my career that bringing additional resources to a project was not met with celebration. So I think, again, that standardization of the processes and allowing us states, especially the DOTs, to develop these projects in the interim. I hope that answers your question, but I think it's all about standardization. And if I might, I also think it's about scalability. Right now, the grant agreements, it's a one-size-fits-all, and unfortunately, it seems like it's lowest common denominator. So again, if they could be scalable for the type of project that we're looking at, I think that would be beneficial too. Thank
Maybe
you.
you share that cheat sheet with us.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Owens, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Titus, and today's witnesses. Thank you for convening this important hearing as the committee begins to work on the transportation reauthorization. For my home state of Utah, this hearing could never be more timely or relevant. Authorized by the FRA just 1 year ago, the Savage-Tooele Railroad is Utah's first new railroad in decades. This 11-mile short line under construction in Tooele County will connect the Lakeview Business Park in Grantsville to Union Pacific Main Line near Interstate 80. Further south, construction is underway for the Salvage Railroad in Iron County, a key component of the Utah's Island Port Authority's Iron Spring project area. This facility also aims to provide direct access to Union Pacific lines, serving as a regional hub for agriculture, enhancing southern Utah's connectivity to global markets. Both these projects are perfect representation of the role of short lines to enhance logistical efficiency to expand economic development. However, these projects have not come easy. The Utah congressional delegation has collaborated to help navigate the very complex approval process. As we look ahead for reauthorizing key programs and departments, we must find ways to remove the bureaucratic barriers to rail investment in our communities. Ms. Bevel, could you share your perspective on the challenges short-line railroads face when advancing projects like the Salvage-Tooele Railroad project in Utah, which aims to connect smaller communities to Class I rail lines?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. Short line, your example of the short line in the state of Utah is a fantastic example of how short lines really do connect the local economy to the national rail network. Short lines have the ability to apply for the CRISI grants, which has been a fantastic program. The advanced appropriations that exist for those CRISI projects has provided some certainty as we go on to know that those programs are available. The challenges with the program is the speed. One of our railroads applied for a CRISI grant in 2020 and finally received the award a year later. And then the agreement, a year to the award, another year to the agreement. All of that has to do some with the environmental process, some with getting documents together. It all takes a very long time. Speeding up the review process, speeding up categorical exclusion, waivers, those things would help short lines accomplish these projects much faster.
Regarding those CRISI grants, obviously it's a job creator for rural communities. Can you share how the short lines select local contractors to repair and rehabilitate work?
Yes, absolutely. So short lines, we don't typically employ big track gangs to replace our rails. When we win these CRISI grants, we have to hire contractors, and those contractors provide really good paying jobs, good local jobs in our communities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hicks, earlier you suggested that FRA established a project pipeline as a way to pre-screen and evaluate projects before the grant application is submitted. Can you elaborate on how you envision this working in practice?
Well, I definitely don't have the details all worked out on how that would happen, but we have discussed the corridor ID program. I think that's somewhat of an example on how you could establish a pipeline of projects, get them into the pipeline, awarded, vetted to do the preliminary engineering, do the NEPA, do the things that take a little bit more time, and then get a solid list of projects available to work from when moved into final design. So maybe it's a two-stage process where you have one approval for the preliminary work, and then after that is completed, then you move on to the second stage of authority to do the final design and construction. That's somewhat how I would see that working.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the ranking member, Mr. Larson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First for Mr. Hicks, in your role in supporting FRA grant obligations, do you know how many grants at FRA are on hold for review?
Thank you for the question. No, Congressman Larson, I do not know what that number is. I do know that our firm has seen a slowdown of those in the last several months. And so recently, some
Sorry, a slowdown of those on hold or a slowdown of grants going out?
a slowdown on the, excuse me, what was the
A
question?
slowdown on grants being on hold or a slowdown on grants going out?
A slowdown, first there was a slowdown on putting them on hold, and now that it seems to be moving a little bit more.
A little bit, yeah. So it's greater than zero.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Do you have any sort of idea of characterizing them? Are they ones that have been awarded but not obligated? If it's obligated by the FRA, is FRA seeming to move forward, and we're looking at only ones that have been awarded?
From my perspective, it seems to be both pre and post, where just in the last several months, just not a lot of movement on both until here recently.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Same for you, Mr. Ucolito. Same question from AASHTO's perspective. What do you, on the FRA grants, what are you all seeing?
Yes, thank you for the question. So initially, I think we did see kind of
Sorry, initially, as of
in January,
20th.
we saw like a pause on action on grants, both at the staff level and within FRA and getting them out the door. I will say from my state's perspective, we have numerous grants from the FRA because we sit on the Northeast Corridor. Within the past month and a half, we've seen staff action begin to occur. They've begun processing environmental documents, so there's been a reaction of many of our grants, which is welcome news for me in my state. I know other states are saying the same thing. At AASHTO's level, we did express to USDOT the risks of any slowdown on grants because when you work in the construction industry, especially in the northern climates, you have time of year restrictions in which you can actually do work in the field. And so any delay of any kind to a construction project, to any federally funded project, could have substantial impacts in postponing it for the next year. So we're glad to see some of our grants begin to actually have action.
Yeah, Ms. Bevel, on the Short Line Railroad Association, are you tracking that issue of grants being awarded, then paused, then going out, or do you have any sense of what's going on there?
Yeah, I think we've had a similar experience where there was a short pause in January, but we're seeing things moving now.
And then, Mr. Dietrich, from Ohio's perspective.
Ohio's perspective is consistent with the rest of the committee, where we just got some pre-award authority letters for an RCE project, and we're getting more documentation now for the grant agreements.
Great, thanks. So, Mr. Ucolito, this week I'd just kind of try not to be too state-based myself because I have a broader responsibility, but every once in a while I get to be. And met with Washington and Oregon's Chambers of Commerce this week, who have a collective view that rail is core infrastructure. Certainly for our state, we're in a corridor ID program. From your perspective at AASHTO, are you considering rail as core infrastructure as we're moving towards a rewrite of the Surface Transportation Bill?
Yeah, we absolutely consider rail to be core infrastructure. AASHTO will be holding our spring meeting next week, and we'll be voting on numerous resolutions tied to what we'd like to see Congress do for reauthorization, an entire section of resolution just dedicated to rail. We know it's critical. It's the connective tissue for our economy, both for passenger and for freight, and without it, our economy would grind to a halt.
That's great. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Burleson, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hicks, in your testimony, you highlight that there are more than 500 independent rail contracting companies in the United States who perform $10 billion worth of rail infrastructure construction and maintaining work annually. And my question, Mr. Hicks, is can you highlight the work that your companies do and how it impacts the broader rail industry?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Congressman Burleson. NRC represents engineers, consultants, railroad contractors, railroad suppliers that are from all 50 states, all over the country. They help to build, implement, and maintain of all these projects nationwide, both on freight and passenger service. So there are multiple companies out there in all of the districts that are performing these services of supplying and building these projects nationwide. So it contributes to hundreds of thousands of jobs in the implementation and construction of the projects and maintenance of them.
And especially under the Biden administration, is the implementation of strict federal regulations, has that made it more difficult?
There has been some difficulties when we've discussed NEPA delays and things of that nature here that definitely have made the cost of the projects increase because time is money, and the longer it takes, the more expensive things get.
Okay. And do you have any suggestions for how we can approach those?
I definitely believe that either through a combination of things of NEPA simplification or maybe assignment to states or maybe expansion of categorical exemptions for common sense types of projects would make a lot of sense in reducing the delays and just consistent management of the projects in FRA also helps with just consistency, keeping them moving.
Thank you. Mr. Dietrich, in your testimony, you kind of went through the differences between the discretionary grants and the ones that have flexibility. Specifically, you mentioned that historically federal funding for construction projects is not obligated until NEPA clearance is achieved, citing that this generally does not pose an issue for traditional federal formula funds granted to states because they have the flexibility to adjust their budgets to match the project schedules. However, for the projects that are specific discretionary grants, it's a different story. Can you elaborate on that? Because I'm not familiar with how this works whatsoever.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Congressman, thank you for the question. So for when we get formula funds, we get the allocation to the states, and as projects come in, we slot the money in as the projects are ready. So NEPA, planning, detailed design, whatever, through the project development process. And that money is just slotted in. So if a project falls behind, then that money would go to a different project. Where with a discretionary grant, the money is project specific. So if we're following that obligation process, so say the FRA obligates money for preliminary engineering and NEPA, but there's a problem, and NEPA takes longer than anticipated. So the rest of that construction funding is unobligated. And then it's only when we're done with NEPA that we go back, renegotiate the agreements, sign more agreements with the FRA for the next step and the next step and the next step. And what I'm asking for is if there's a possibility for the FRA to look at that obligation process. So when they obligate the funds for the entire life cycle of the project. And that allows us, the money is obligated, there's certainty there. We don't have to keep going back for amendments, different agreements, but rather you just go through the natural progression of the project. Because as I pointed in my testimony, what it is it's worst case scenario. We're advancing projects with the hope of the money being there, and likewise, the FRA looks like they're sitting on a bunch of money not being used, when actually it's all committed. So if there's just some way to match that obligation to the project commitments, I think it would help everybody.
Okay, and I wanted to get one last question in with my time. Ms. Bevel, you said that there's approximately 350, you didn't say this, but I know that there's about 315 miles of track of short line rail in my district. And given the difficulties and the obstacles with grants, can you shed some light on how difficult that is for short line or the smaller businesses?
Sure. It can be challenging as a small business to plan out work that needs to be done on your short line with the timelines that these grants take. So if I'm planning a project for 5 years from now, that's not going to take care of my needs that I have right now for new ties and rail and crossings on my short line railroad. So anything we can do to speed up the process of receiving this funding would be helpful to short lines.
Thank you. I yield back.
Okay, Mr. Moulton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so proud to work with the ranking member on high-speed rail, and we're making real progress there. But I want to give more context to something she said when she mentioned that no passenger rail system in the world exists without subsidies. Well, the reality is in America that we heavily subsidize highways and airlines and barely give a pittance to passenger rail. $535 billion over 35 years for interstates. The gas tax, of course, doesn't cover the cost, so since 2008, we've transferred $275 billion in taxpayer money from the general fund. And this is only direct costs. We commissioned a study in Massachusetts to understand the true picture of government subsidies for driving, including things like emergency services to handle accidents, because you are 17 times more likely to die traveling the same distance by car as by train. It works out to $64 billion a year just in Massachusetts. So every family in Massachusetts spends an average of $14,000 subsidizing everyone else driving, even if they don't own a car. Now, speaking of safety, we just had 2 more close calls at Reagan National Airport this weekend, months after the worst U.S. air disaster in years. So how are the airlines doing with subsidies? Well, the federal government spent $54 billion to just bail out the airlines during the pandemic. After 9/11, it was $5 billion plus $10 billion in loans. So Richard Branson, father of Virgin Brands, once said that the fastest way to become a millionaire is to be a billionaire and buy an airline. On top of this, we give massive subsidies to airlines without a second thought through the FAA, the TSA, and billions of building airports. Our private airlines would lose money hand over fist without that help. Congress just approved $12.5 billion to modernize air traffic control. Remember that, Mr. Chairman? Very analogous to positive train control, the next generation of rail traffic control, and yet Congress didn't pay for that at all. We made the railroads pay for it themselves. Railroads invested nearly $11.5 billion to install PTC. In fact, the only transportation system in the world or in America rather, that truly operates without public subsidies is our freight rail system. And that speaks to the innate efficiency of the things you're talking about. So I think that, look, if my colleagues truly believed in the free market, we would let these modes compete. That's the way other countries handle transportation funding. Rather than just pour billions of taxpayer subsidies into highways and airports, they find out which solution makes the most sense. And so there's not some vast high-speed rail conspiracy that infects every other developed country in the world except for the United States. It actually just is more efficient. It also happens to be better for public safety, economic development, housing, the environment. And yet one of the biggest cost drivers of high-speed rail projects is the environmental reviews. So that makes no sense. In terms of a level playing field, Commissioner Iccolito, when I drive from Boston to New York on Interstate 84, why is there no stoplight where it intersects with I-91?
We want to make sure to get people through efficiently and safely.
Right, so you don't have to stop, right? You just you have a transfer, okay? And yet, Connecticut says you value the Northeast Corridor and you encourage your citizens to ride trains. And yet, on the busiest passenger rail corridor in the country, where the line diverges from Penn Station to Grand Central, there's no interchange. Why does Connecticut have no plan to build an interchange? Because right now, 2 trains show up at the same time. One of them has to stop and wait.
So I know with that specific case, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, MTA in New York, they are working on Penn Station access to improve throughput into Penn Station. We in Connecticut...
Well, I would just ask, and if you could take this for the record, how many highway interchanges has Connecticut built in the last 100 years? Because you have not built a single modern rail interchange, like we're just discussing, at this intersection that is so critical, that delays thousands of passengers every day. It would be interesting to hear that. Let me also ask, does Connecticut conduct highway maintenance at night to minimize disruptions?
Yes, we do.
So does every other railroad in the world, except, to my knowledge, Metro North. Why does Metro North only conduct maintenance during the day, delaying thousands of passengers on Metro North and Amtrak every single week?
I could take that question to the president of Metro North and get back to you.
I'd appreciate that very much. Look, the point is, we ought to just have a level playing field. It's crazy that a mode of transportation that is so fundamentally good for public safety, good for the environment, constantly gets hampered by government reviews and red tape. That's why this hearing is so important. But we also have to have a comprehensive picture of the subsidies here, because it's so out of whack. We're subsidizing all the inefficiencies in highways and airlines, and and we've got this amazingly efficient system that we hang out to dry. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Fong, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on the future of federal rail assistance. I appreciate the testimony from the witnesses as we assess how best to steward taxpayer dollars in support of America's transportation infrastructure. We must take a hard look at what has worked and what has not. In my home state, the California High-Speed Rail Project is regrettably a textbook example of government mismanagement and fiscal irresponsibility. Since 2009, the Federal Rail Administration has allocated approximately $3.5 billion to this project, $2.5 billion under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and nearly $1 billion in subsequent federal grants. These funds have subsidized a bloated bureaucracy and a project that is nowhere near completion. Originally pitched to voters as a $33 billion system connecting San Francisco to Los Angeles, the price tag now exceeds over $100 billion, with no direct connection between either of these cities in sight. Instead, we have carved up my community, California's Central Valley, to create a stranded asset with no utility. This is not just a California problem. It's a national issue because it's federal taxpayer money being wasted. Congress cannot and should not continue to send resources to this project that has no accountability, weak performance metrics, and no realistic path to completion. The California High-Speed Rail boondoggle highlights exactly what happens when lofty promises collide with poor planning and unchecked spending. It should serve as a warning, not a blueprint for future federal rail investments. As we consider rail grants going forward, we must demand results. Investments must have clear deliverables, cost discipline, and independent oversight. If I can ask, in terms of one area of investment is short line rail projects. Ms. Bevel, first and last mile service is absolutely essential for supply chain and goods movement for shippers, retailers, and the short line rail industry. How does first and last mile impact shippers? How does first and last mile impact shippers, and what steps are needed by Congress to improve efficiency and reliability, and what kind of safeguards can we put in to ensure viable projects are supported?
Thank you for the question. Short lines impact shippers in an incredibly positive way. Most short lines are local. The folks that work on the railroad live in the communities where the customers live. We are the first mile, last mile. We're there to adjust service. We can be flexible and bring the national network to those customers. So oftentimes you will hear customers say that they want to locate on a short line because of that service. Providing that service requires intensive capital improvements to our short line railroads. That's track, rail crossings, and the CRISI program really provides a lot of benefit in that way. Having advanced appropriations, knowing that funding is going to be there is important, and being able to get those dollars into short line railroads' hands.
Thank you very much. I'll just throw, just because my opening statement was so focused on high-speed rail, but in California, but it is clearly just the biggest waste of money. I mean, I represent an area where I see the damage every single day. I drive by these corridors, we call it the Stonehenge of the Central Valley, where we have billions of dollars being spent from not only in the federal government, but the state of California is spending $1 billion a year trying to salvage this project with just no private investment, a complete bait and switch, I think, to what the voters were promised. So if I could ask, what kind of safeguards do you envision included in the federal rail assistance to ensure viable projects are supported and non-viable projects are not supported? I'll throw it out to the entire panel.
Congressman, I don't know if this is equivalent, but during my testimony, I said that one of the things that we do is we use the federal funds to supplement our state programs. And so I think one of the nature and one of the reasons we've been successful is we don't ask for federal money unless we're putting money into it. And all of our projects also involve funding freight projects involve funding from our federal partners. So I think using state programs such as my own as kind of a I don't want to say a litmus test, but a screening process. So what makes the Chrissy Grant program work for us is that it goes through the same screening as if we were going to give it state money. It just becomes an order of magnitude and a scale of can we handle this with the state program? Is the scope appropriate for federal funding? So I think having those screening mechanisms at the state level might get to what you're talking about. Again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, so I apologize.
I appreciate that. I've run out of time. I might trust the Ohio government better than the Sacramento, but I yield back.
Ms. Fisher, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
To work. There we go. Thank you, Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Titus for holding this hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being here with us today. As members of this committee are well aware, prior to the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was no guaranteed source of funding for intercity passenger rail. The 18 states who fund Amtrak service, including my home state of North Carolina, would have to wait until after Congress finished the appropriations process to know how much money would be available for passenger rail service and projects that year. The majority completed the fiscal year 2025 appropriations process in the middle of March, halfway through this fiscal year. It's not hard to imagine how that would make project planning and budgeting for state DOTs immensely difficult in a world without the guaranteed BIL funding already in place. Mr. Ucalito, can you speak to the way BIL has impacted the ability of states to plan for passenger rail projects?
Yes, thank you for the question. When we look at transportation infrastructure investments across all modes, having reliability and predictability of funding allows us to do long-term planning of where we should be investing our funds, where we should be allocating our staff resources, which are very limited. If we don't know that funding will be there to apply for or to receive, then we may be hesitant to invest our staff resources and a lot of our planning resources towards those projects. The IIJA having this ability to know that these funds are available to go after, states like mine have been able to redirect our resources, make long-term plans for infrastructure projects that we never thought we'd be able to actually execute. And then I know in other states, they have other projects that they're looking at implementing. We talked about one in Nevada, but also I know North Carolina is heavily investing in rail, and those states are now, they see the opportunity, they're dedicating the resources at the state level to match those federal funds. And that's the important thing that my colleague from Ohio talked about. Everything is matched with state and local funds as well, so it's a force multiplier in investments.
Indeed. North Carolina is using a federal-state partnership for intercity passenger rail grant, the largest grant award in the history of our state, to establish the S-Line, providing a better, faster, and more efficient connection between North Carolina's rail network and Virginia's, and thereby connecting my state to the expansive Northeast Rail Corridor. Any reduction or delay in this grant would increase project costs, have a direct and negative impact on job creation, and would endanger years of planning and collaboration between the North Carolina DOT, freight rail companies operating in our state, and the communities in which the S-Line has been promised. So, Mr. Ucalito, what would happen if the FRA were to suddenly reduce the size of one of those grants you and your team are currently executing?
So we start a project under the assumption that the funds will be there when we need them and that the project will be funded, and we work to make sure that we monitor it carefully and do it in the most efficient way as possible. If there was a funding reduction in a rail grant or any form of grant, we would look to potentially suspend work on that project. We would have to go to our state legislature to see what we'd have to move around to supplement the loss in federal funds. It's difficult then to look at the landscape of all the infrastructure needs in our state. What projects would we suspend or pause? And in my state, my state DOT, we have a bin of unfunded projects. So in this case, we would put that project, put it in the bin, and then hope that funding would become available in the future. And it would put people out of work who may be lined up to work on that project.
Thank you for that. And lastly, can you speak a little about how you and the Connecticut DOT are working with the U.S. DOT to ensure that you're able to protect your state's existing grants and execute on the FRA's requirements?
Thank you. The staff at FRA are fantastic professionals who have been doing amazing work trying to deliver, I think, over 500% increase in rail funding. It's been truly impressive. They're under a lot of pressure, and so we have been spending a lot of time meeting with FRA staff to work with them to try and find some efficiencies for how we can get work out the door faster and more efficiently, and try to get things moving and put shovels in the ground.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield.
I'd like to ask unanimous consent that we enter into the record announcement of Secretary Duffy and President Trump issued today, which approved 24 rail grants totaling $300 million. Without objection, show that ordered. Mr. Stauber.
Thank you, Chair Webster. I've said it before and I'll say it again, NEPA is holding back our supply chain infrastructure, our energy independence, and our economy as a whole. And while we made some important changes to the NEPA process in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the reforms were largely ignored by the Biden administration as they interpreted that law as, quote, just a suggestion. Environmental assessment, 1-year shot clock. Environmental impact statement, 2-year shot clock, and the Biden administration said that was just a suggestion, unfortunately. Why would you pass legislation to spend billions of dollars on infrastructure and not actively work to remove barriers so projects could actually come online in a timely fashion? Ms. Bevel, I know CRISI grants are important to the short line rail industry. Does NEPA often delay and get in the way of short line rail from using their awarded CRISI grants?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I mean, it can delay projects. A majority of short-line CRISI projects apply for a CE, but even that process can take some time. Often we need to hire a consultant to go through that process to get the categorical exemption. If it's a bigger project, say a larger bridge or a build-out of some stretch of rail, then the NEPA process can take a very long time and can add to us completing the project years.
Which is years, which is a lot of money and a lot of time, right?
It is, yes.
Okay, so you mentioned categorical exclusions. Tell us where that would be a benefit. Explain to us why and where that would be a benefit for the short lines.
Sure. So when short lines are doing track projects that are on their own property and not disturbing any outside land, being able to just submit, for instance, say a grant CRISI award was announced and there was a bunch of projects that kind of fell into one category, if those could just move through quickly and get that categorical exclusion, be excluded from the NEPA process any further, that would make things go quickly.
So you have let me try to rephrase this. You have a short line, let's say a mile of track that you wanted to replace in the same location. New track, new steel, and you're looking for a categorical exclusion. It's denied. You go through the NEPA process, which could take years, costing time and money. You're putting that replacement in the exact location as the prior track. Doesn't make sense. And that's why we have to really look at getting these projects online sooner, not skipping out on environmental laws or labor laws. The gentleman just talked about projects being delayed. It's time and money. So the categorical exclusions in this example is perfect. It's on the same location, same property, same line, just newer steel and maybe newer safety features.
That's correct. And we have no problem complying with the environmental laws. We agree to do that. We just want that process to happen faster.
Exactly. I think that the four witnesses here can help our American economy by looking at the NEPA process and helping us when we're currently doing permitting reform. You know, I've said it in this committee before. Can anybody tell me on this, any witness here, tell me on average how long it takes to open up a mine in the United States of America? 29 years. 29 years. That's on average. I mean, we can do better than that. You're the transportation experts. We need to get this running, and we need to get it done yesterday. And so I think that all of your help is going to really be a positive impact on our rail and safety community. So with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Delazio, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. I want to focus my questioning on the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. My district in Western Pennsylvania, we've got freight tracks running all over the district. 95% of my constituents live within 5 miles of those tracks. Almost half live within a mile. And we have some of the most dangerous crossings, not just in Pennsylvania, but in the Northeast region. Cheswick in particular, very dangerous crossing. Lots of data about it. McKees Rocks is another. And so I think that Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program is essential. It's a very important one. I know the railroads agree with this. I know communities have been begging us for more action from the federal government. But a complaint that I often hear is that these grants are very difficult for small communities to apply for and get. And in Pennsylvania, and in Western Pennsylvania in particular, lots of smaller municipalities, boroughs, townships struggle to get this funding. And so, Mr. Ucalito, Mr. Dietrich, I'll start with each of you. What can we do to make it so that smaller communities can get these dollars to deal with crossings where it's in their community? These are dangerous crossings. How can they get those dollars?
Thank you for the question. So this is a common problem we see at the state DOT level with rail grants and all modes of transportation. And so what we've been doing on the roadway side is we do a fund swap oftentimes, because the hardest part is actually using the funds once the communities receive them to comply with all the federal regulations. So we'll often take funds aimed for locals and swap it with state funds so they don't have to deal with the federal red tape. That's not available on the railroad side, but I think there are things that can be done to make it easier, such.
Can I just, if that's an approach, does that require something from Congress? And if so, what should we be thinking about?
So that's available for the formula fund side. I think it is worth looking at the federal highway programs and what they allow for those fund swaps. It works great for us at the state DOT level to allow local governments to use state funds while we use the state funds, so they don't deal with the red tape. We could apply for, on behalf of local governments at the state DOT level. That's an approach, but also having like a uniform common application, because every grant application is different. And so the local governments have to figure out how to apply for that grant application with that specific requirement. If there was almost like a common app like for college admissions. For grants, it'd be a lot easier for local small communities.
Well, and I'll tell you, and I know I'm not alone in this, I have municipalities of a couple hundred people in my district who have rail crossings who need these federal dollars. Mr. Dietrich, I'd like you to weigh in as well.
Thank you for the question. The way we've handled that in Ohio is we set up a state program. Governor DeWine set up a state program, and what we use that for is we have communities apply to us, and then we'll determine whether that is something if we can handle with state funds. If it's a smaller project, say an access road as opposed to a grade separation. If it is a grade separation, we'll work with our DOT districts and go through our local program administration process. So we will apply on behalf of the communities and with concurrence from ODOT to build the project if we're awarded. So as Connecticut does, we will apply on behalf of the local communities, but we'll use that state money to determine if the project is scalable enough, if we can do it just with state funds.
And that's that's your approach with the current requirements and grant application rules, rather than if we were to change something here in Congress.
Yeah, and it gets to more of the complexity of just administering federal funds. I mean, I think one of the things that is really important to note, we deal with federal funds all the time, so we're set up to do this, but like the shoreline railroads, the small communities, whether it's Chrissy RC, they're just not set up to do it. And I mean, that is something that we as states have been taking on that role. It's a traditional role through the formula funds. It's not a traditional role through the discretionary project. So we struggle as states on how to best assist local communities, how to best assist short lines. Sometimes they'll get the awards and they'll realize that they do not have the organizational capacity to administer them. So I wish I had you identified a very, very legitimate concern. I just don't really have a good response other than that we take on a lot of that responsibility as state DOTs to help communities with it.
I thank you both, and I hope the committee will be thoughtful about thinking about our smaller communities as we get to work on this coming year. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Taylor, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Titus, for holding this hearing today, and thank you to our witnesses for your testimony and insight and the sacrifices you made to be here. I want to especially thank Mr. Dietrich from the Ohio Rail Development Commission for testifying before the committee on Ohio's successes in growing its rail industry and increasing rail safety in our great state. Ohio has 44 operating railroads and over 5,000 miles of track, making Ohio the third largest rail infrastructure state in the nation. With Ohio's presence in the rail industry, it is vital that when Ohio receives federal grants, the funds are delivered promptly. Mr. Dietrich, in your testimony, you mentioned how grant applications require a great amount of time and resources to compile. As I'm sure you are aware, many rural communities across southern Ohio do not have the resources to hire grant writers. Can you elaborate on how the state of Ohio has been able to help rural communities receive federal dollars from the Federal Railroad Administration?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to Representative. Actually, it goes along with our other question. We actually set up a program where communities and railroads will apply to us, and we will then be the applicant. We will take on responsibility for the grants administration. We were just successful, Circleville. We just received an RCE grant for that, and we're going to administer that for them. We're working with Haverhill right now down in Sauter County to do through that same process. And that was enabled because the governor provided us the state funds, so we can do the planning, we can do the studies that communities don't have the resources to apply for. They don't even have the resources to apply for the grants. So that's the role that we're playing to help the rural communities.
Well, as Congressman Fong stated, the Ohio government is surely more trustworthy than the California ones, but how are we going to help the rural communities outside of Ohio is there something Congress can do to make it easier for them to get grants?
Mr. Chairman, Congressman, the only thing I can think of is, possibly some training to administer. There is programs under federal, under FHWA formula funds, the LPA program, local program assistance programs that provide training and things like that to local communities, and I think that would be something that could be done.
Okay, thank you. Ohio has over 500 miles of short-line rail that delivers critical goods to businesses and communities. Short-line railroads across the state and country often rely on CRISI grants for infrastructure improvements, safety enhancements, and workforce development. Ms. Bevel, in your experience, how have CRISI investments benefited railroads and surrounding local communities in terms of economic growth and public safety?
Thank you for the question. In my experience, we have a railroad in Mississippi, actually the Grenada Railroad, that we partnered with local mayor of the city of Hernando, as well as 6 other mayors to apply for a CRISI grant in the last round that was awarded. And that grant will expand capacity, which will eliminate blocked crossings and also upgrade numerous crossings across these small towns in Mississippi. That's a way that we've really partnered with the locals to promote public safety.
Thank you. Mr. Dietrich, again, we've talked a lot about the NEPA process in here today. Do you have an idea of how Ohio administering the NEPA process itself, how much that sped up the process of getting permits out?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman, we just received it in December, so we're just embarking on that. We anticipate that it will, I can't give you a timeline because, as Ms. Bevel said, a lot of the freight projects are just low-level CE, so they're going to be on a project basis. The low-level CEs, I think we would be able to process, almost batch them out, I think, especially if they don't involve railroad right-of-way. So there's going to be an immense amount of time savings on those projects. The larger grade crossing elimination projects with real estate acquisition, things like that, those would still be more on timeline. Our anticipation is they'll be more on timeline as if they were FHWA or just standard ODOT-led projects.
Okay. Thank you all very much, and yield back.
Mr. Johnson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for hosting this critical hearing, and I thank the witnesses for their time and for their testimony today. The bipartisan infrastructure law was supposed to be a turning point for America's rail system. For the first time in 50 years, we had the funding, the jobs, and the plans to deliver modern, safe, and reliable rail service in every corner of the country. It was about giving communities, many of which had been waiting far too long, access to the transportation services that they deserve. However, instead of building on this historic investment, we're witnessing reckless actions threatening to undo it all. Under this administration, we've seen grants slashed, funding blocked, and workers laid off. These actions aren't just inefficient, they are actively stalling progress, driving up costs, and delaying projects essential to providing the rail service the American people were promised. These cuts are stripping away jobs from the very people who are supposed to be rebuilding our infrastructure, upgrading our tracks, and designing the rail systems of the future. It's a direct hit to the workers who make sure we're on track for progress. We need more than an empty declaration. We need reliable, predictable, and dedicated funding for rail in the next surface transportation bill. The American people deserve better service now, not 10 years from now. They've been waiting long enough. Our investment today will create jobs, improve safety, and finally connect people to the services that they need. It's time to get back on track. Let's finish the job we started and make sure that the promises we've made to the American people are kept. Mr. Hicks, as we work on the surface transportation bill, it's critical that we evaluate how the Federal Railroad Administration is delivering on its mission, not just internally, but through contractors it relies on to carry out that work. Gannett Fleming Trans-Systems holds a contract worth up to $50 million to support the Federal Railroad Administration in managing and implementing major infrastructure grants. We all know the grant process can be complex, especially with the scale of investment we've seen under the bipartisan infrastructure law. However, with that level of responsibility comes an expectation that this process is constantly improving and not stalling. Mr. Hicks, when did Gannett Fleming Trans-Systems begin work under its $50 million FRA grant? And how many people are currently working on this project?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Johnson. Yes, GFT has been actively working, supporting FRA since about 2010 on multiple contracts over that time that do add up to that
Under
number.
this current $50 million contract?
The current contract.
When did you begin work?
I believe was awarded in, I want to say, 3Q or 4Q of last year.
And we
have not really been doing much of anything on it right now.
Why is that?
Under directive of the FRA to pause action.
So the president and DOJ have cut the grant, and you're not able to receive the money to do what you were to do under the grant. Is that correct?
There was definitely a pause that came from some directive and to us from our client FRA to slow down or stop, which is recently starting up again, but slowly.
All right. Any other reasons why you have not begun work under the grant?
No, just direction from our client.
All right, thank you. Ms. Bevel, the investments made through the bipartisan infrastructure law have clearly had a significant impact. Can you discuss the ripple effects we are seeing from these investments, particularly from shippers and carriers, and what will happen when the money dries up or if the grants remain paused?
Sure. One of the major causes of derailments for a short line railroad is lack of ties and failure of the track. And the CRISI program directly addresses those conditions. Putting money into our track then allows our customers to have efficient, reliable service. They rely on the short lines to get goods to the National Rail Network, and we need the track to get them there. Without the CRISI program, those projects will slow down. They will either not happen or they will happen over a course of many years versus getting the projects done right away.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Niles, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all our witnesses. Had an opportunity not so long ago to go down to Fort Worth and Western Railroad, located in the great state of Texas. It operates over 276 miles in 8 counties in our state. So, Ms. Bevel, I know we've talked a lot about CRISI, but explain to the people that are watching this how valuable robust funding is for these rail safety programs like CRISI.
Sure. Most short lines began from purchases from larger railroads of unprofitable branch lines. And so short lines have a lot of deferred maintenance. In order to correct that maintenance, programs like CRISI really provide the ability to invest in the track.
So I know we've been talking about it, inefficiency, government inefficiency, we've seen it. How long does it typically take to achieve a CRISI grant agreement with the FRA?
From the time of application to award, it can take 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
I've heard of projects taking longer as well.
So what's the total length of time between the award announcement and the actual disbursement of the funds?
The time from award announcement to agreement is usually a year or so, and then to actual disbursement can be another 6 months to a year.
So 1 to 2 years. Talk a little bit about the element of advanced appropriation funds associated with the programs like CRISI in the context of providing long-term project planning, program stability, and efficiency.
Sure. As small businesses, it's so helpful for short lines to know that this amount of grant funding is going to be available in years to come so that we can plan our capital expenditures accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's critical that we distribute these funds in a timely manner. I think we have the right guy in the White House to help us with that, and we will support the new administration. And at the same time, it is critical that rail safety grant programs like CRISI do not go towards mismanaged projects. The California High-Speed Rail, I think Mr. Fong from his state of California said it very clearly. It's just a money pit, nothing good happening there in Florida. And instead, I think it should go to the Class 2s, regionals, Class 3s, the short lines, the switching railroads, which connect and serve our rural communities and have smaller scale, shovel-ready projects that deliver more immediate and widespread benefits. So thank you, Ms. Bevel. Mr. Dietrich, I'm a strong advocate for rail safety. I am. Last Congress, I introduced with my friend Seth Moulton, who is he's brilliant, a Democrat that knows a lot about rail safety. So we introduced the Rail Safety Enhancement Act of 2024, authorized $1.5 billion for each of the fiscal years 2025 through 2028 for the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. Very, very important. 2,000 such collisions, 200 fatalities every year. And we need to provide and allow for more construction of overpasses and underpasses. Obviously, effectively separating road and rail traffic and reducing the likelihood of these accidents. I understand the FRA awarded a railroad crossing elimination grant to Ohio, to the Development Commission, for the Hines Hill Road separation in Hudson. Explain to me how that impacts your industry and how critical it is to eliminate these dangerous crossings.
Congressman, the RCE program has really been a game changer.
Yeah.
Heinz Hill is a perfect example of what wouldn't have happened. This project has been around for a decade or more
Yeah.
of the community not being able to just have the resources to address it. We were able to, and again, thankfully, the governor put together a safety program, so we had the money to leverage with the local community.
Beautiful.
They applied one time, they didn't get it.
Good.
So we went back, we worked with them, upgraded the application. I can say one of the state senators, we embedded a video the state senator had of a school bus trying to do a 12-point turn at a block crossing. Talk about a picture saying 1,000 words about safety. So that, the RCE program is transformative. We received 4 additional, we have 4 total projects under the RCE award. Each one of them are for long-term projects that the communities have always wanted. And, to Congressman Tyler, we talked about rural communities, but these are long-term issues for urban communities as well. So it really, the program is, like I said, I can't speak enough about how transformative the program is.
Fantastic, thank you. I yield.
Mr. Ryan, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm probably going to hit on some of the common themes that, in a good way, are bipartisan and important in our districts, and really appreciate each of you taking your time today and the work that you do. I represent the Hudson Valley of New York. It's about 2 hours north of New York City. Very significant rail infrastructure and presence. Thousands of miles of both commuter and freight, mostly CSX on the freight side, and Amtrak and Metro North in terms of passenger rail. I have over 100 rail crossings in my district. All of them have been challenged at varying degrees in terms of safety and rail safety. But there are 5 specific areas that I just want to quickly talk about in leading up to a question about the RCE program that we just heard from questions from my colleague on. So in the city of Kingston, my hometown, actually 35 very fast-moving, heavily weighted trains per day going through a densely populated urban area, carrying waste, petroleum, industrial chemicals, all critical things, but a long-standing pattern of safety issues there. Same in the city of Newburgh, where we've had near catastrophic derailments co-located next to the major water supply for another one of the major urban areas of my district. In the town of Ulster, along the CSX freight line, multiple tragic fatalities. In one case, due to the literal lack of any pedestrian signage at a known crossing site, including most recently in 2023. In the town of Saugerties, an entirely ungated rail crossing on a major road without any warning signs that in 2017, a constituent riding in a taxi was actually killed as the taxi driver was lost and unaware of where they stopped right in the path of an oncoming train. And finally, in the city of Port Jervis, at the western edge of my district, where just a few years ago, again, this tragic story repeated of a fatality due to a lack of proper signage and safety crossings. The good news, the good news is that thanks to the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, part of the bipartisan infrastructure law that we've heard so much support from, we got a grant in the latest round for the city of Port Jervis to develop pedestrian accessibility improvements for an existing ACT-grade crossing. So just want to continue to foot stomp this in a bipartisan way, the importance of this program. And to say, I don't think this should be partisan, but I'm worried it might become that as we look towards this next surface reauth, I think it would be a grave mistake to cut funding, and I think we obviously need to add funding given the American lives at stake. So with that very long wind-up, and I appreciate you all listening to that, got to bring this home for constituents in my district. Mr. Dietrich, you talked about rail crossing elimination. You were just talking about it in your state, and I think in my colleague's district, actually, ironically. So as we look towards the surface bill reauth, this, as I said, has to be a top priority. I know you've probably not been to Port Jervis in the fine state of New York, but can you talk about what the impact would be if we were to lose the funding, or if it were combined, as we've heard rumors of, to have RCE combined into some larger pool, which could then get diffused for these needs?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. grade separations are difficult for communities. They're difficult for even to rank them separately, because if you do, the RCE program, one of the good things is it doesn't have a benefit cost analysis associated with it. All the other programs do, because it just doesn't cost out that well compared to other projects. So I think having the separate program for the grade separations is very, very important. I also think allowing some of that flexibility, and as I said in my testimony, if part of it could be allocated somehow so that we could do development, so we don't have to apply just for the planning funds, I think that would help everybody get more of these crossings done. And finally, you know, I think it's also to note that while RCE is very, very important, we also layer those other projects. So like I mentioned something in the last testimony, Circleville in Congressman Tyler's district. We actually started that project with FHWA formula funding. So, you know, blending these things, it becomes more of a kind of an economic development funding stack as opposed to a traditional, you know, local federal partnership. It's made up of a lot of different money, including private railroads. So I think that's all really important there.
And I know I have 5 seconds. Do you think if it were not separated out, that we would, in effect, lose these critical projects, though? I mean, is that a fair assumption, given your expertise?
I think adding it to a BCA application would be very hard.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're back.
Ms. Sykes, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all of the members here our witnesses here to testify. Really excited also to hear about so much Ohio love. I have been saying on this committee, we are the heart of it all, and hearing my colleagues from not only California and Texas commend us for all of the work that we do just lets me know that I am on the right track, pun intended. And so I do want to talk, obviously, about the topic at hand, and specifically about passenger rail in Ohio. And this is something that has become very near and dear to me for a lot of different reasons, considering what's happening in Ohio. And so with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's been a renewed interest in capacity for infrastructure from coast to coast, and one in Ohio was Amtrak's 3C+D corridor expansion. This 3C+D is a proposed passenger rail line to reconnect Ohio's largest cities, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Dayton, through reliable modern rail service. However, none of the C's in the 3C+D stand for Canton, and there is no A for Akron, which is in Ohio's 13th district. The plan will put together Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, Detroit corridor, and there is no stop in the Akron-Canton area. There really isn't a whole lot to offer for the eastern part of the state, which, as you know, Mr. Dietrich, is fledgling with lack of economic opportunity and very rural, and it would be a boon to have some type of mobility there. In fact, back in 2011, former Governor Kasich returned and sent back $400 million of federal highway or federal rail money back to the federal government that went to states like California, although we did just get a boon for how our state operated. The money that would have come to Ohio over a decade ago went to the state of California. And Mr. Dietrich, I know that you were the Federal Rail Commission chair at that time when the decision was being made. And so this conversation is about rail plans and projects and why they take so long. But I know that most of the argument is about NEPA, but it takes a whole lot longer to raise $400 million and turn it away. And that, I would say, is probably a more damning problem as to why we don't have rail. So if you could talk to us about that decision that you were a part of so many years ago and how it has held back passenger rail in Ohio.
Thank you for the question. While I was Rail Commission chair, we were the agency that developed the project, and so that decision was made at the executive level and not involving the staff in terms of returning the funding. I will say that brings to a point that for whatever reason, as we develop passenger rail, there is a policy component or a policymaker component. And I think that's one of the great things about the the Corridor ID project is that is one thing that allows for us to do the planning. And so as in the state of Ohio, as you mentioned, we're advancing 2 corridors right now. And what that program allows us to do is it allows us as a DOT, as subject matter experts, to advance the project to a point where then we can provide that information to the policymakers in the state, which is, for us, it would be the executive branch and the legislative branch and the General Assembly, present those projects to them, and then they can then determine appropriately whether they want to move on to the next step or not.
Thank you so much. But, you know, it still seems to amaze me that sending back $400 million, and I've seen estimates of upwards of 16,000 jobs out of the state of Ohio, a state where we are losing population and need as much job support and economic development as possible. You know, obviously, I was not in the legislature, I was not in Congress when those things happen, but now that I am, and I have a community who is asking for rail, I looked at the rail improvement, or the state rail plan from 2019. There was a request from folks in the community for a stop in Akron-Canton to go out into the Akron-Canton Airport into the community. I have a letter from the Akron-Canton Advocacy Alliance, which is the greater regional chamber and the greater Akron chamber, requesting that Akron-Canton be a part of this, and consistently we have just been told no. And so, Mr. Dietrich, we haven't had a chance to talk about this publicly, but please tell me and share with this community why Ohio's 13th congressional district and my community is not eligible and should not get passenger rail as in your purview.
Well, again, it's not ineligible. The applications that we submitted, especially the 3C and D, were based on historical studies. I can say that we have revived some of that work that was canceled back in 2011. That work did look at a routing through Akron, but it was ruled out as not fitting the purpose and need of the project. And when I say purpose and need, that's a very technical term, not that it's not needed in the community. We are going to be reviewing that process through step 2 as we move for that corridor. So all those will be reevaluated. I would suggest for the Akron community something that other communities have done. There is a great deal of, I don't want to say misunderstanding, but education needed with passenger rail, the differences between commuter rail and intercity passenger rail. And I think, you know, some of the comments there, I've talked to some of the local transportation officials there and asked if they could, you know, work together to provide some kind of clarity there in terms of we can't have good times between major cities. Like, you know, one request was to connect to Pittsburgh. Another request was to include in the 3C and D. Another request was to connect the airport. And another request was to look at commuter lines to Cleveland. From a technical standpoint, those are all different projects to us, and they fall under even different funding sources and grant sources. So I'm happy to, again, continue to have that conversation. But I think that's something where we can help the community by providing guidance, and as we talked about, which is the right program to apply for these things.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Garcia, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, and of course our 4 witnesses. Freight movement and the related infrastructure have a tremendous impact on Chicago, with over 7,400 miles of railroad tracks and thousands of rail crossings. We're very familiar with rail and the benefits and challenges that come with it. We've got kids in my district who have to choose between crawling under idling trains blocking the crossing and being late to school. We've got drivers and bicyclists who wait half an hour for a train to go by, or attempts at dangerous at-grade crossings. And we've got entire communities affected by idling trains, which contribute to bad air quality. So in 2021, I introduced a bill to establish a grade separation program to increase and reduce the collisions at rail highway crossings. And I'm proud that the IIJA created a grant program that did exactly that, called the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. These grants have already been coming to projects in my district and across the country to make crossings safer but we've still got a lot of work to do. Commissioner Ucalito, why are programs like railroad crossing elimination grant programs critical for states to advance rail safety improvements? And two-part question, what types of safety projects can be advanced thanks to the IIJA's increased eligibility?
Thank you for the question. As you rightfully pointed out, a lot of times if drivers are waiting or bikers or pedestrians are waiting for extended periods of time, they often will be more likely to take risks. It's true on the railroad side, it's true on the roadway side, where if people are waiting a long time to cross, they may take a risk and cross when it's unsafe. And that's what the Rail Crossing Elimination Program allows for the grade separation. It allows us to take the steps to improve safety in the communities in which this railroad infrastructure exists. That is something that I think every state wants to see continue. In my state of Connecticut, we are using state funds right now, and we're hopeful to apply for RCE funds in the future to try and create a sealed corridor so that our heavily traveled Hartford line can have modern safety equipment with quad gates, lights, camera detection, and then in some of our communities with freight rail, we're doing pedestrian crossings and better lighting there for the pedestrians and signals so they know when it's safe to cross and when it's not safe to cross.
And what projects do you think could be advanced under the IIJA?
So many of those grade separation projects I don't think would be possible without the IIJA's Rail Crossing Elimination Program. We have a project in Connecticut where we did receive some planning funds to look at how we can design a grade-separated crossing on Tolles Road in Wallingford, Connecticut. It's heavily traversed by freight on the roadway side, crossing with a passenger rail system for Amtrak and our state-run passenger rail system. So without the IIJA funding opportunity for us to apply for in the future, I don't think we'd ever get that program off the ground.
Thank you. In Chicago, the railroads, the state of Illinois, and Cook County in the metro region have all worked together to identify needed projects to improve passenger and freight rail flows through the city of Chicago. This series of projects is called CREATE, and without federal investment, there'd be no incentive for competitor railroads to work together on the capacity constraints of Chicago. The nationally significant Multimodal Freight and Highway Projects Program, or INFRA, has funded several CREATE rail projects with IIJ funding. Commissioner Ucalito, what benefits do you see in having infra funds go to freight rail projects?
So infra, serves for many of our states to advance freight projects. It does fund very large cost projects, and previously, without the existence of rail crossing elimination or dedicated rail funding, infra was really the only place we could go for these types of projects. And I think it's critical to continue to allow that eligibility because it is truly a multimodal system with our roadways intersecting with our railroads and our transit systems. And a program like infra allows us to do those large projects.
Thank you. My time has expired. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Freeman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Webster and Ranking Member Titus, and to our witnesses for coming to join us today. California, which I represent parts of, has very heavily used rail lines. I know that everyone thinks that everybody just rides their car in Los Angeles, but people take the train too. In fact, my mother lives near Laguna Beach, and I take the Surfrider down from Los Angeles very frequently. And there have been many times where I've been on that train when it's been standing room only. In fact, I've had to go to San Diego at times where they run out of seats and people are standing in the aisles. And it's great that people want to be riding these trains, but we also need to do more to give people a pleasant ride at the same time and to accommodate all the riders that we have. That line that goes up and down the California coast has about 3 million riders annually. And it's the second busiest inner-city rail corridor in the United States. And it's got a lot of challenges. As you know, there's tracks that are falling into the ocean kind of over and over again, and we can do a lot better. Now, we are seeing private investment in some of our lines, with Brightline now working on what I think will be one of the most popular train lines in the entire country between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. It's going to be quite the party train. But one thing that we don't have is rail line that's anybody knows about or takes between Los Angeles and Palm Springs, or Coachella, which are other huge destinations. Just a week ago, I had to go to Palm Springs for a meeting, and it's not fun. Let me just tell you to drive. I mean, Palm Springs is fun, but driving there is not fun. But we have tracks, but we don't have Amtrak service that goes reliably between LA and Palm Springs. I think there's one train that takes, for some reason, 4 hours, leaves it at about 10:30 at night and arrives around 12:31 a.m. in Palm Springs, and I'm not even sure if it's daily. So we have a lot of opportunities in Los Angeles to increase ridership, deal with congestion, get cars off the road, and have a more pleasant experience. So I wanted to ask Mr. Eucalito what we can do to improve existing high ridership lines in the United States. You know, it's not a NEPA issue, but we have places like LA to Palm Springs that make so much sense, but we don't have any service at all. We've got LA San Diego, where people are taking it. We have maybe 8 trains a day, but they're overcrowded. So what can we do to target fixing and improving these lines?
Thank you for the question. So Connecticut is heavily rail dense state, and what we encountered is we inherited a lot of old rail infrastructure. Some of our movable rail bridges are 130 years old, and we inherited it from the private sector when they went out of business. And so it's been a continuous try and make the investments we need to bring it back up to where it needs to be in 21st century standards. And so what IIJA has allowed us to do is make the investments we need into our existing infrastructure to do better signaling technology, better crossover and change points, upgrade the tracks, and improve the overhead power, the catenary system. And that will allow us to increase capacity on the rail lines and get more trains moving. You know, on the Northeast Corridor, we have over 600,000 trips per day, and we can increase that by continuing to make the investments in the system to bring it up to modern standards.
Thank you. And let me ask you a follow-up. Do you think that programs like the FRA Restoration and Enhancement Grant Program, which I'm sure you are utilizing, are they oversubscribed? Is there a bigger desire and need for these grants to upgrade our infrastructure so that we become a first world country, or is there plenty of money lying around?
I think my state alone could probably use all of the available funding for those programs.
Thank you. And what about cuts that we're seeing to the Department of Transportation and others? Is that something that's going to help your efforts to modernize and improve your system and get people rolling on these rail lines? Or do you think that that's just a neutral and okay thing?
So we have a really great relationship with the staff at FRA as well as the other modes. We are waiting to see what happens with all the people who have taken the deferred resignations. We do know that administering grants is labor intensive, so it's going to require, maybe we're going to have to look at, do we need to change the whole process around if there's going to be a reduced staff capacity? But we want to see the most efficient process possible, but we also want to get the money in the ground as quickly as possible.
Thank you. So clearly, people are using rail. They want to use rail more, and they deserve those investments from their government to help make this transportation function better. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Nedler, you're recognized.
Mr. Eucalito, you've testified to the critical role that the bipartisan infrastructure law's historic rail funding has played in delivering long-deferred projects, particularly in the Northeast Corridor. However, even with this progress, demand for rail funding still far exceeds available resources. With 69 corridors selected across 44 states under the Corridor ID program, short-distance state-supported routes now account for nearly half of all Amtrak riders. In your view, how important is it for state DOTs and ongoing projects that Congress expand funding levels for rail programs like CRISI and the federal-state partnership in the next Surface Transportation Bill?
Thank you for the question. So, from ASTRA's perspective, the historic funding that was provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act really needs to be a base when you also account for inflation. Inflationary costs have driven up project costs for us to do any of the work we need to do on the railroad. And so without accounting for that and seeing the increase in the next reauthorization to at least account for that inflation, we're going to go backwards in where we need to be, because we have historic investments that need to be made due to the age of the infrastructure that we are trying to repair out there.
Thank you. As part of improving the Northeast Corridor, Amtrak is working on the Gateway Program, a series of projects to improve travel on the most congested section of the track between Newark, New Jersey, and New York Penn Station. Recently, Secretary Duffy reduced the previously awarded grants for the Northeast Corridor, including 2 in 2 weeks for Penn Station and Dock Bridge, and threatened other federal grantees. Mr. Iccolito, what could reduced or uncertain funding for Northeast Corridor infrastructure projects mean for the reliability and capacity of rail service used daily by residents in the tri-state area?
Due to the size of the investments we need to make in our infrastructure on the Northeast Corridor, I think we need predictable and reliable funding. And IIJA did provide us with at least a vision of how we could have that predictable and reliable funding through the efforts of the Northeast Corridor Commission and working with the FRA. Developing that list of priority projects allowed us at the state DOTs and the recipients of the funds to actually plan ahead. Here's the work we need to do, because these are not projects that will be done in a year or two. Some of these projects will take a decade to accomplish. When you look at having to maintain the rail traffic on that railroad, there's no detours around the Northeast Corridor. So we have to continue passing trains while doing the infrastructure work. And so it's very complicated compared to the highway side. So we need that predictability and reliability to continue making the investments.
So what are the effects of Secretary Duffy's reducing previously awarded grants?
I can't speak specifically to the Gateway program because that's outside of Connecticut, but I can say from Connecticut's perspective, we rely on the federal grants that we receive to know that we're going to put people to work and keep them working and deliver the program. If there's any delays to that project and getting delivered, it's going to ultimately drive up costs. And now we always look to do value engineering, and I think there's always ways we can save costs on our projects, and we look at that every day. But we need to know that the funding is going to be there when we're doing the work.
Thank you. Mr. Iccolito, as you know, federal grant programs like CRISI and the federal-state partnership depend not only on strong funding levels, but also on stable federal grant administration, a well-staffed Federal Railroad Administration, and timely project execution. In your experience, what are the potential impacts on state-led rail projects when previously awarded funds are delayed, rescinded, or subject to sudden policy shifts? And how can Congress help ensure continuity and cost efficiency for the remainder of the bipartisan infrastructure law and in future grant cycles? You just answered the first half of the question, but how can Congress help ensure continuity and cost efficiency for the remainder of the bipartisan infrastructure law and in future grant cycles?
I think one thing that would be really helpful is we talk a lot about within the USDOT, but we also need to worry about the regulators. So the Army Corps of Engineers, the Coast Guard, we rely heavily on them to process our permit applications. And oftentimes they close up shop when they run out of funding, or they are reduced staff, and then projects get delayed, sometimes up to a year as a result. So while we need to also work on ensuring that we have the partners at USDOT and FRA, we also need to make sure that we continue to look at our regulators to make sure they're able to actually process the permits that are necessary for us to do the work.
Thank you, Mr. Iccolito. I yield back.
Seeing no other people that want to talk, meeting's adjourned. Thank the witnesses for presenting themselves and giving us fantastic answers. We really appreciate it. Meeting's adjourned.